our objective for Central and Central's management team is to be the number one choice for owners of Class A real estate, period. If you understand your customer, you can create the right product, and that will almost always deliver financial results that you want. If you have a Class A building and you want it to perform at its highest level on a dollar per square foot basis, you should understand this method, the Central method of managing a building. And if you do, you probably are going to realize, why wouldn't I do this?
Welcome back to Neutral Podcast. We are in San Francisco today, and this afternoon we're going to get a little surfing, which will be fun. But we're at ICONIQ Capital with Jaja. Thanks for coming on the podcast and agreeing to letting us have a conversation.
Yeah, excellent.
But today we're talking a lot about short-term and mid-term rentals and kind of the general multifamily market, mostly from your perspective, sitting at ICONIQ, but then also through the lens of owning Central. But before we get to that, maybe just give us a little background on yourself and kind of your bio.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. The bio, I've really been a real estate investor my entire career, which started back in about 2002 when I moved to California. And at that time, I took an apprenticeship with Emerald Fund. And at that time, I was just looking for my first job in real estate, looking around, trying to figure out what was available to do in residential real estate as a category. And everywhere I went to interview, they would say, hey, you need to go see Emerald Fund. You like residential? Go see Emerald. Go see Emerald. So I finally figured out that Emerald Fund was owned by a guy who went to my college and business school. And I wrote to him and I said, hey, can I just sit down with you and learn a little bit about your business? And he said yes, because we stick together that way in the alumni network. And I ended up just saying, look, like I'll work for you for half my MBA rate. And if I create some value, let's renegotiate. Because I really wanted to work at that firm. It had a really good reputation, and we're doing the types of projects, infill development of multifamily and condo and hotel. I'm like, I'm going to learn a lot here. So we worked out an agreement, and then I ended up at Emerald for like 14 years and learned so much from those guys, Oz Erickson, Alistair McTaggart, Mark Babson, about how to create homes for people and create value for investors along the way.
And then after Emerald, where do you go?
Yeah,
after
so
14 years?
after Emerald, I ended up at Airbnb, and that was an interesting transition because a man named Chip Conley, who Emerald, we'd actually built a hotel, a Joie de Vivre hotel here in San Francisco on the Embarcadero, and interestingly, as the universe works, I was already friends with Chip through a different relationship, Chip Conley. And Chip Conley had recently joined the Airbnb executive team in charge of strategy and hospitality and other things. And he recruited me to come join him at Airbnb to figure out how to introduce Airbnb properly to the incumbent multifamily community. Meaning, a lot of the big REITs had figured out that people living in their apartments were Airbnb hosts. And they did not like that at all because it meant people they didn't know were coming into the building and the residents were making money hosting on Airbnb platform. So there were security concerns. There was money being exchanged that they weren't a part of. There were all these certain issues. And I was one of those owners. At Emerald Fund, we had a portfolio of 2,000 plus units, all Class A, and we were starting to see Airbnb hosts. So when Chip called me and he said, have you heard of Airbnb? I'm like, matter of fact, I'm writing a letter to residents right now that says, don't do it. And he said, we need to talk, right? And he asked me to come down. I didn't know he was recruiting me at that time. I thought it was just an informational, like, let's talk about what landlords think. And when I got there, it might have been the second visit, but like I was introduced to the founders and a woman who was running like legal and other things, Belinda Johnson, and they were like, this is a big issue for us. And if we don't figure out how to interact with multifamily players, it's going to put a cap on our growth trajectory. And I've totally agreed and thought it was one of the most interesting real estate problems that I'd seen in my career. And then when Chip invited me to join the team, I was like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so what year was that when you joined Airbnb?
That would have been maybe 2014.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the main kind of thesis of you joining Airbnb was really to then focus on multifamily and how to cater towards multifamily owners that
Yes.
then would bring Airbnb into their apartment buildings as kind of short-term stay units.
Yes. Yes. Our objective was to normalize hosting in Class A and other multifamily buildings around the world. And to do that by understanding the needs of those building owners and property management companies, and then offering them an opportunity to share in the profits, the newfound revenue that was available for owners of multifamily if they would embrace home sharing. And that concept, I went to some of the major industry conferences that year and the following year, and those rooms were really rough because most people in the multifamily business thought Airbnb was only a threat. And there was some adversarial energy out there around it.
Interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your experience at Airbnb
Sure.
a little bit later on.
Sure.
But after then Airbnb, where did you go from there and how did you land at ICONIQ?
Well, over the course of about 5 or 6 years, we built the Airbnb for real estate business. It was called the Friendly Buildings Program at one point, but basically we were creating these relationships with some of the larger real estate investment trusts in the United States and not yet overseas, but in the US. And in the process of doing that, ICONIQ Capital, where I am today, ICONIQ was an early investor in Airbnb. ICONIQ has done an amazing job of identifying growth opportunities to invest growth capital in unicorns around the world, in software as a service, and other platforms that are really disrupting large industries and have a lot of tailwinds. So they were early in Airbnb, and Jeff Felder, who's now my boss, the managing director for ICONIQ Real Assets, came to interview me to learn a little bit more about what we were doing at Airbnb and the applications it might have to multifamily at large. Like, what are the implications of what's happening at Airbnb? Because it was truly a global revolution of how people lived and moved around in cities, living in furnished homes and in towers and everything in between. So this kind of culture of learning is what defines ICONIQ in certain ways, and they were there to learn about this. In the process of talking with Jeff and Kevin and some others from ICONIQ, we realized that there was an opportunity to change the way the whole multifamily asset class thought about furnished inventory and the revenue and the growth opportunity if multifamily were to embrace furnished rentals in its core business model. And we knew there was a straight line on how to do that if we could only prove it. And so Jeff invited me to join the team at ICONIQ. He had already started raising capital around a concept similar to this. And that's how I ended up on the ICONIQ team.
And the reason why ICONIQ wanted you specifically was because you had a kind of the depth of experience both in multifamily from Emerald, but then also the short-term stay experience at Airbnb.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, it was like a magical moment when I saw those two things converge, because like most good things in life, I had no idea I would end up outside of the multifamily bricks and sticks part of the business and in a technology platform environment where we're a marketplace for home sharing. But the marriage of the two opened up this whole world of value creation for technology platforms, for distribution systems, like all of the Airbnbs and the price lines and all these other OTAs in a really unique way. And that's been what's made me excited about my career these last like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. And so what was the business that ICONIQ, I don't know if they bought it or if they just started it up to kind of be able to spin this whole thesis around?
Yeah. So really early on, Jeff and I when we were trying to figure out how we would capture this opportunity of flexible living around the world, we knew we needed to prove that if you were to operate furnished and unfurnished inventory inside the same building, you could have a better resident experience and more profit for the owners. So the first step was to purchase a bunch of Class A inventory. And so Jeff and a team, our real assets team, did a bunch of acquisitions, pretty much from coast to coast. Because remember, our mindset is let's prove the case. So we bought about 4,000 units across 6 or 8 different cities. And the next question was, well, this is an operations case study. Who's going to manage these buildings? First, we thought we might be able to use a third party. All the big players are out there with proven track records like Greystar and others. So you got a Class A building, we can help you manage it, right? They can do it, soup to nuts. But we wanted it to be done differently. And we figured out pretty quickly that those incumbents were not interested in modifying the way they manage buildings in order to afford these new lines of revenue and profit centers that we were important to our investment thesis. So we ended up needing to start our own property management company. And we did that by identifying a few small companies that were either managing things we had already purchased or were in those regions. And we ended up buying one of those companies around which to build what we call Sentral today.
And why did you decide to buy instead of build? Like, why wouldn't you just build your own property management firm? Was it just kind of learning the lessons early on from them?
Well, speed was important. And we knew that if we could start with some of the basic practices and administrative infrastructure necessary, it would save us some time. I've had experience starting businesses from scratch. Jeff and others on the team had, and we just knew, let's get a rolling start here. But what we purchased was so small that it really gave us the opportunity to design every important system and our brand and all those things from scratch. Kind of best of both worlds.
So really just buying kind of the initial infrastructure and then being able to mold that and modify it to what your vision is.
That's right.
And what is the long-term vision of Sentral from a property management standpoint? Like how, us as a developer or another client of yours, we use Heinz Living right now, but others use Greystar, Bizzuto. There's a ton of property management firms out there.
Yes.
What is the kind of differentiation as you kind of as Sentral bring to us as the developer?
Yeah. So, ICONIQ is the majority owner of Sentral, and our objective for Sentral and Central's management team is to be the number one choice for owners of Class A real estate, period. And to differentiate itself by offering a way to manage the building in such a way that there's more profit for the owner and a better experience for residents and guests of the building. It's really that simple. I like to say, if you have a Class A building and you want it to perform at its highest level on a dollar per square foot basis, you should understand this method, the Sentral method of managing a building. And if you do, you probably are going to realize, why wouldn't I do this, right? I can make more money. I can have higher retention of my residents. I can have a more diversified revenue stream of revenue, and I can manage downturns in the market in a more nimble way. We can talk about that if you want to. But,
I'd love to. We'll talk about that in a sec. I think just wrapping up kind of this first section here on your bio. So Emerald was really where you learned the multifamily experience. Airbnb heavily focused on short-term stay. Now ICONIQ/Sentral, kind of mixing both of those worlds together and bringing this kind of unified front to the market, which is really, I think, powerful and interesting.
Absolutely. I love that summary. The only thing I would add is at Airbnb, there was also a real insistence on understanding the customer journey, right? And the brand, right? The community that goes with it. Airbnb did very little direct marketing, like paid advertising, because it was so focused on making a great experience that a customer would tell another person about. And that really stuck with me as we started to think about Sentral and what it should be, how would it grow and why would it be special? Central is one of the first branded, well, intentionally branded property management companies where it will deliver a brand for you as an owner that you can put on your building, new construction or pre-existing, to become part of a network of branded destinations to live or stay or play, right? And we thought that was really unique. Like when I was younger, when we were leaving college or grad school, somebody said, "Well, what kind of building do you want to live in?" We have no idea because there was no differentiation between building owners. One of our objectives would be that when you talk to a college kid coming out in a major city or moving to a major city and say, "What kind of building do you want to live in? What community do you want to be part of?" They say, "We want to be living in a central or something like it," right? And we know that the demographics of this age group of people who are moving into Class A apartment buildings, they value the community and connectivity, a network, and travel to have experiences rather than just, a door and four walls.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because that aligns with what we're trying to do at Neutral as well.
No doubt.
And it's like you see all these student housing that I think you look at that industry, they've executed on that thesis really well, where it's like you have chapter. We just got a new chapter Madison, which is really nice. But you have that, you have Core that's doing their branded stuff with Hub and all their different product types. And they've done these like immaculate experiences for students. And it's like these students get out of college, and you're right. They're like, well, where do I go next? Because they don't want to live in student housing anymore because that's, young and they're partying and everything. But as a young professional, it's like there's really nothing that's been branded that's unified experience that if you're working in New York and you get a new job here in San Francisco, it's like, well, is there another central that I could go to and have the same experience as I have in New York? And so I think that's a huge gap in the market that you guys have identified. Give us a little background on maybe why that gap exists and kind of the origination of short-term stay, mid-term stay, what those words mean,
Yeah.
and kind of how we think about it in the multifamily space.
Yeah. So there might be a couple different questions there. Why does the gap exist? For the longest time, there was really no need to think about housing as a national network. Most of the housing decisions, if you look back, I'm a 1970s baby. In the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, very early 2000s, most of your moves, if you look at the data about where and how often people move, they were pretty local, right? People who moved to other cities with call it 400 miles or more was going to be a smaller percentage of the moves. And this meant that branding could be local. It meant that a lot of those decisions were made without much consideration and without much competition. This is why the multifamily business, at least in apartments, has been pretty stagnant in a good way, profitable, but stagnant. Now, as the world changed, as they say the world got smaller, but companies like Airbnb opened up a mindset and a culture of, I'm going to try other places. I can travel at a reasonable price. I can travel with my family or with my pets. And I can it opened up more modes and nodes of travel. And this had a parallel in how people don't just want to stay for short periods of time, but stay for longer periods of time. So there are a bunch of different trends that contributed to what used to be a non-branded local decision business to what it is today, which is more like a national or international, nationally branded business that looks a lot more like the hospitality sector, right? Hotels, boutique hotels, motel, all the other stuff, right? And because these two categories have started to move together, you need to have discipline on the marketing side and on the product side that understands both those worlds, the hospitality world and the older school multifamily world. So that's why the gap existed. And the way you close the gap is by producing a product that speaks to all these needs. We like to call this flexible living because the thing that closes the gap is offering exactly what that customer needs in the way that they need it. And that might be a very short stay, right? A nightly stay. It could be a medium term stay, which what we usually describe as like 30 days, 60 day, or 90 day. And those companies who did the 30, 60, 90, those companies have been around for a long time. That was Court, that was Synergy, that was a lot of those other players who had been in the corporate housing space for a long time. But in order to close the gap, a new group of what were sometimes called tech-enabled short-term rental operators, they moved into the space, and those were companies like Sonder or like Central, of course, is my favorite. Flow has moved into the space. There's a lot of different businesses that um, looked at this opportunity to reinvent the way the corporate housing space worked. Placemaker is one. So that was kind of like wave two, and that took place between, call it 2014, 15 through today.
Interesting. And so you kind of define midterm as this corporate housing, which I
Yes.
think that would mean like you have nurses that are traveling,
Yes.
you have maybe people that are traveling for work where they're staying for a prolonged period of time, as you said, 30, 60, 90. But
Yes.
then you also have the short term stay, which is like you can think about it as maybe a potential option to not stay at a hotel
Yes.
for 3 or 4 nights, but instead stay in a furnished apartment where you have ability to cook and you have maybe a little bit more access to amenities. Um, Give us a little bit of demographic for like what you see the demand for short term versus midterm. And are you guys more focused on the short term stay, or are you more focused on, getting partnerships with like Google and large hospitals and big
Right.
health providers to
Right.
focus more on the midterm stay?
Yeah. So as an owner of the real estate, our objective, and in my opinion, any owner's objective should be to get the most demand for your building that as you can possibly get, because with that demand comes pricing power, right? So with that in mind, we ask Central to tell us what is the ideal mix of short stay, medium length of stay for a particular building. And based on um, research and their relationship with Highgate, which is a major hotel operator around the world, they are able to, for any owner, tell you based on your location of your real estate, what's the right mix of short and medium length of stay furnished, and how much of your building it should be. Like, should it be 5%, 10%, 20%? What percentage? Okay, so now once you know that, then you get to look into what drives each of those segments: the shorter stay, the medium length. And the demographic for the shorter stay tends to be people who are vacationing and who are moving about, consistent with the demand for leisure travel, and then also for business travel, right? So those two layers go in the shorter stay. That's the typically for our portfolio at ICONIQ, we end up with about a 3.9 average length of stay for the shorter stuff. The demand for the medium length of stay, Central goes out and does create corporate relationships. They have over 100 corporate relationships with companies like um, Google and Amazon and all these other major players who have employees who are moving around the country for different reasons. They're opening up offices, they're doing this, they're doing that. And those stays are typically like 2 months. Okay, on average, they range from 1 all the way up to 3 months and sometimes more. Those require direct relationships, right? So there's actually, Central has a corporate sales team. And if you own a building and you want that kind of demand, you need to have those relationships with those HR teams and those personnel teams of people, travel departments that are making those decisions. The mix between that, between the shorter stay and the longer stay, depends on the geography, the location where your building is, and what type of market.
So let's talk about that for a second. I know Central is an owner of a portion of your portfolio through Iconic, and then the other portion Central just third party manages.
Yes, Central doesn't own any real estate. Only ICONIQ owns the real estate. Central is a manager only of for us and for like 25 or 26 other institutional owners. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So from the Iconics perspective, then maybe from putting that hat on, what is kind of your guys' ideal market for, let's just say, a like ideal central, right? Class A, really nice building. Like, is it New York? Is it San Francisco? Is it Omaha, Nebraska? Is it Madison,
Yes.
Wisconsin? Like, how do you pick your markets and why do you
Yes.
pick them?
Yes. So, an ideal market is the place where we can drive the highest dollar per square foot from that particular building, right? And the way we get to the highest dollar per square foot is by deploying as many types of revenue in the building, revenue creation opportunities in the building as possible. And Central will enable all of those. The markets where you get to enable the most typically are cities that have friendly regulations for short-term rentals. So take a place like Miami or uh, Atlanta, or that tends to be some of the Philadelphia, some of the Sun Belt states, some of the. I've got actually a list of some of our favorite markets here, right? San Diego. So you want to try to find locations where you can have short-term rental, furnished short-term rental. You can have furnished medium length of stay. You can have what Central calls enhanced services, and that's things like food and beverage delivery services to your room, food and beverage delivery or rooftop bar and other things that enhance the resident experience. Certain types of resident amenities that are revenue generators. So you can rent out a chef kitchen, or you can rent out certain spaces, right? You can get dog walking services. Like, there's all these different custom packages that can produce revenue, but you want to be able to stack those up almost like a cake, right? And from each of those, you're getting a little bit more NOI than if you would just run it as an unfurnished Class A building without those additional features.
So one thing you had shown us was you have these different tiers, right? So you have a tier one, tier two, tier three for the markets.
Sure.
San Diego's in tier one. You have Boston in tier two, by example, and then you have San Francisco for an example in tier three. Is that just different rankings for what you're talking about of restrictions to short-term stay and midterm stay? For the most part, that's what you're looking at.
For the most part, that tends to be what moves a city from a tier one to a two or a three. All those cities that are mentioned in that list are places where there are lots of jobs. There are plenty of affluent professionals who need a Class A product. It's typically also where there are a lot of cultural amenities, museums, restaurants, these kinds of things. High walk score cities and locations tend to be, where there's a concentration of that. Those are the markets where we as an owner like to own product, and where Central is going to be able to operate it at a very high margin for us.
Because then that means you can boost NOI and
Yes.
you can create
Yes.
that additional value that other operators aren't able
Yes.
to do.
We can deploy all of Central's capabilities to make the property very special.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so one thing like we're experiencing right now, but I'm curious to hear your opinion on is we have an issue kind of with like paying for the short-term stay. And what I mean by that is, we design these beautiful buildings, but they don't come furnished.
Yes.
And we want to have beautiful interior design. And so we're seeing like somewhere between 20,000 to 50,000 for us to do the type of furnishing we want. It's like beautiful pots and pans, nice cutlery, all these different furniture. So how do you guys make sense of that from a cash flow standpoint and kind of current cost of capital standpoint of, okay, we're going to have 10 short-term stays or 50 short-term stays in a building, and we're going to put this additional capital expenditure out there because we know there's an additional revenue stream coming back to us for it.
Yes. Yes. So the best way, I think, to make that decision is to first measure how confident you are that when you have those furnished spaces, they will be rented. You want to know what's your occupancy expectation, what's your average daily rate expectation you're going to back into your RevPAR. Once you know that, and if you're confident about that, then you can tell what your return on investment will be for any investments you make to turn on your furnished rental program. You've got to understand what's the timing of the return of that dollar invested to start up your furnished program. If you work with an operator who understands the market where you've purchased or built something and are opening, then you can get more and more confident about, hey, if I put this dollar in, I'm going to get it back. Through our experience over the last 5 years, we've been able to get return on investment within 18 to 24 months on any furnished rental investments, right? That CapEx that is upfront. In addition, if you work with a company like Sentral, there are a lot of ways that you can finance or rent or get certain credits from Sentral as a property manager to make the decision almost no risk for you. And you can walk your way into, from a lower percentage of furnished into a higher percentage of furnished. Meaning, right, you take smaller risk up front and then you build as you begin to see, oh, wow, like I'm making a lot of money from this and my building is operating great and I'm working with an operator who knows how to do this. So you just add more later. But there's always a way, if you use those steps, right, really understand the market, invest in a way that you understand the ROI. And if you're uncomfortable, rent first or work with an operator like Sentral who can purchase those furnishings for you and provide those, right? In a way that's financially efficient. That's how you do it.
So for the financial decision, if an owner's thinking about doing this, right, they're looking at maybe a few studios, maybe a few one beds, maybe a few two beds to do this with.
Yes.
And they're looking at, okay, I'm going to, from a long-term lease of 12 months or 18 months or however long-term they're going to do, they're going to get, let's just say $1,000 per month for a studio, right?
Sure.
Are you guys bumping that rent to, once you factor in the yearly revenue divided by 12, you're able to bump it by 20, 30%? Are you seeing that much boost? Or is it more like 5 or 10?
Oh, it's on the higher end, not the lower end. So one way to think about it is if you have your unfurnished chunk rent, in most cases, in most markets, and you'll do underwriting on a building specific basis to know this number, you're going to be able to get 30 to 50% more revenue on that unit when you furnish it.
Per year
or per month, however you want to create the denominator and divide it. But like that's the premium, 30 to 50%. If you are willing to do more short-term, that's on a blended basis, right? Your medium and short stay. If you have the short stay, you can get 65, 70, 80% premium to what you would have as an unfurnished 12-month rent, okay? So when you're dealing with that much premium, you can see how pretty quickly all of that's going to drop to the bottom line once you cover the cost of your furnishings. And if you're covering your cost of your furnishings in 1 year or 2 years, then you've just basically created a lot of lift.
So with that, so that's the income side. So let's just say I do all short term, right? For those 10 units that I do. So I increase my income on those 10 units by 60 or 70%.
Yes.
Not factoring in
your income by 10 to 25%, but your revenue, your top line,
right,
yeah,
EGI,
yeah.
Effective gross income, let's just say, is increased by 70%. So now I'm getting 70% higher effective gross income. But then when we look at the expenses, right, like our typical operating expenses are right around 30%. Depending on what market we're in, taxes are the big kind of factor in that. How much am I increasing my expenses on those 10 units? Not the overall building, but on those 10 units. I mean, it's nice because I don't know if the assessors factor this in. I'm assuming they don't. So your taxes probably stay the same, which is probably a huge benefit.
Yes.
But how much is it increasing on the expense side of the equation?
Well, I would look at the entire P&L, right? So if you're only going to take down 10 units or so, how many total units is in this hypothetical?
Let's hypothetically say 200.
Yeah. So you're talking about a very
5%.
small percentage of your units. Your overall cost structure is basically not going to change in any material way because number one, all of the costs associated with the furnished program are indirect costs, meaning you can roll them back if you're not getting the revenue that you expect to get, and you can go back to your pre-investment cost structure. But in a building that's 200 or so units, you're going to add, call it 1 FTE to your staffing structure. And you're, depending on how many units and all those goodies, you'll have some turn costs and other things like that. But those again are variable cost, or they're indirect, and you're only going to encounter those costs if you are actually getting book nights.
And so the FTE, that's basically just the additional person that you're bringing on. Which like our buildings, we already operate with like full service concierge. We have service managers, we have property managers. So I don't know if we even need to bring on one more person, but like
Yes.
that sound okay. So that's one like fixed cost.
Yeah, and I'm just rounding to 1 FTE because depending on your staffing model, you may or may not need that person.
Yeah.
But in general, you're going to want to have someone who's focused on your furnished program in a way with a certain percentage of their time, right? In order to make sure that you've got the right coverage for check-ins, check-outs, and for turns and turn administration or turn management. And so we can arbitrarily use that as a 1 FTE.
And then the other thing I've been thinking about is like from the turnover standpoint, I know like for Airbnb, you get charged back cleaning, right? So cleaning is not an expenditure to you because that's just a income and expense. But then from like the long-term maintenance standpoint, are you seeing a degradation in these units that would be greater than like a long-term stay, right? And what I mean by that is like maybe you have to repair the baseboard more often, maybe you have to paint the unit more often, maybe, someone throws a big party and they trash everything and you got to bring in all new lighting. Are you seeing more kind of usage out of that specific unit where now you're having to put in long-term OpEx sooner than you thought?
Yeah, we were very concerned with that at the beginning, 4 years ago when we started to roll out this business model. There was a bit of a surprise, which was because for those furnished units, for that percentage of the building, we're in those units more often as an owner or a maintenance team. They were actually able to catch things like drips or loose caulk, or the things that typically you don't see until an actual move out on a long-term rental. Our teams could catch those earlier. So those units actually ended up in better condition with lower total cost of ownership on the maintenance side than the traditional unfurnished units. And it's just because if you think about it, I used to be a property management leader. So I was in units all the time. And the thing that would help me manage my units the best was when I could get into a unit. And so if you have a certain percentage of units that are furnished, you're going to be in those units more often.
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question is no, it doesn't produce higher cost. The things that do get more wear are things that are cosmetic. So that would be things like your baseboards or handles on cabinets or things like this. They're minimal.
Yeah.
When you think about the amount of revenue you've created. When we're talking about 65 or 70% more revenue on the unit, you're like, yeah, I'll put a new handle on that cabinet. Like that's not a problem.
No problem. Interesting. That's not intuitive at all because you would think, people that are not owning or renting long term maybe wouldn't care for it as much. But it makes sense when you think about, you have your service manager that's there and he's there maybe even every single week checking up on the apartment versus once a year and doing a full audit.
Yeah, it turns out most of the costs associated with the unit turns in multifamily have to do with issues of neglect, right? It's that J pipe that's dripping into the bottom of the cabinet and the guy who lives there just never looks or doesn't care. And we don't know about it as an owner for 6 or 9 months, right? Those are the places where you really hit most of your heavier costs. But the other thing is people who are coming in for shorter stays, if they're managed in a central building, their identity is known. There's deposit on file. There are things like you can have noise monitors in your building, right? So there are no big parties. And these things are disclosed up front before check-ins take place. There are eyes on and 24/7 kind of management of the building to make sure that the whole ecosystem is humming all the time. So a lot of the things that early on owners were concerned about, even back in my Airbnb days, it was like, is there going to be a party? Is somebody who's not supposed to be here? Like those things have been eliminated through technology of understanding identity and checking identity before people arrive, and then properly managing the on-site condition.
Interesting. So give us just a little bit overview on Central. How many units do you guys have under management? When did you start? How is it going?
Yeah, so Central started with 4,000 or so units that ICONIQ owned back in, I would call that 2019 or 2020. And today, Central manages close to 13,000 units around the United States, almost all Class A or A plus, and has become really well known for offering a premium service to institutional investors who want to get more return from their Class A product.
And does Central do any development, or is this all kind of just build, stabilize assets, and change the operational model?
Central has managed lease ups for brand new construction for owners who are just opening a building. They've done takeovers for buildings that have been around and fully occupied for a while, but the existing manager is underperforming, or certain other cases or reasons for change. Let's see, Central operates in pretty much every major market in the United States, and um, offers all those different business models, from just the traditional unfurnished property management kit all the way to some buildings that have very high penetration of furnished and other luxury service amenities.
Interesting. And from the Iconic standpoint, because this was obviously a big investment, capital expenditure for Iconic, because not only are you building a whole new company, but you're also investing in 4,000 units, which
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
sure is not cheap.
No.
And Iconic has a whole bunch of opportunities to invest and get a great return. Why is this an interesting thesis and kind of value perspective from Iconic's viewpoint from the investment side?
Yeah. Well, at ICONIQ, we like to try to find opportunities that have the benefit of societal or global change at scale, right? Where we can see a bit around a corner and understand that something is driving um, a change in the way a large business is done. In this case, we're talking about where people live, how people live, especially in the largest cities in the world. And so a few things are important. We know cities have been growing when you take a wide angle view over time, and that they will continue to grow. We know people will continue to live in apartments because the cost of housing is high. The cost of ownership compared to rental often is favorable for rental. And especially for the demographic that's moving into the marketplace now, they're valuing experiences over ownership. So we think the trend in rental housing will continue to be favorable. So the question just became, if we love the size of this asset class and we see that there are changes in society, much of that being driven by technology, Iconic's deep on technology and understanding how and why it works. What would be a better investment than to have a technology driven investment in an asset class that's growing and foundational for how people exist on the planet? So this is just the first of this type. There probably will be other opportunities in housing, but right now, multifamily has shown to be like this really interesting and large category that's being changed by technology. And in this case, when I say like, okay, well, how does technology change multifamily? If you look at the way Central is able to deliver both long term, medium length of stay, and short term stay, the back end systems that are used to manage the building come from multifamily firms like Yardi and RealPage, but also from the hospitality sector. There's all kinds of booking engines and marketing platforms and distribution that all need to be sewn together in a really interesting way, and that hadn't been done before. So we're bringing at Central, we're bringing like a technology tool set to enable a whole new tranche of profit for multifamily that didn't exist before. If you think of a local owner, right, a guy who owns, or a family owns a business in Cleveland, Ohio, they have, for the lifetime of that property, been able to draw residents from a geography of about 50 square miles. Well, as soon as you take a business model like Central and add it to that building, now your geography is the whole planet. Anybody coming to be in Cleveland for any length of time is now your customer. And that was enabled entirely by a different technology perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting when you think about the total addressable market for multifamily building, as you said, in
Exactly.
Cleveland.
Yes.
that has Cleveland as its addressable market to the world. Obviously, that's exponential growth, greater than 10.
Exactly. And I choose Cleveland because I'm from Ohio, and Cleveland always gets, slapped around a little bit for just being this place that people think is boring. And boring real estate in Cleveland can be financially viable, but it's even more viable when you open it up to a geography that comes for conventions or comes for sporting events or all these other kinds of things. You've got to be that owner, right?
Yeah.
You want to own that.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it's almost this merging of hotel as we traditionally see it, multifamily as we traditionally see it, but in one asset. And so you're basically taking, I kind of think about it in my mind as two buildings, really. Traditionally, back if you look at it 20 years ago, it would be a hotel on the same block as a multifamily asset.
Yes.
Now it can just be one asset that maybe if you look at it collectively is actually much, much smaller. So the cost of build is much less, but you're receiving revenue from both. And so your revenue goes up. And something you talked about before the show was that you guys are seeing a bump in untrended return on cost of about 1% to 2%, which I think is phenomenal. I don't think we've seen anything that has disrupted the industry to increase untrended return on costs by that much. And just for our listeners, so that they know what that calculation is, because I think some people, unless you're a finance nerd like us, might not understand it. But it's basically, for those who are listening, your total NOI, which is just your net income after expenses, divided by the cost of what you're purchasing it for, either building like we do at Neutral or at Central with ICONIQ. You guys are buying it. And so if you're increasing it by 1% to 2%, that means the cash flow is then increasing by 1% to 2%, which on a $100 million deal is a big deal.
It's a big deal. We like to think of it as our unlevered return can a change in operations that is low risk produce an increase in unlevered yield of 1% to 3%. And the answer is yes. We've been able to prove that over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and it works in. You asked a question a little earlier about like, does Central do development? Right. It works on existing buildings, and it also works in development. Central will consult to developers who are creating the new inventory of Class A in major cities to help them understand how to design those buildings in a way that they can deploy these other lines of revenue in an efficient way, in a cost efficient way, in an operationally efficient way. And if those developers get that knowledge up front, they can build in all that extra yield into the perpetuity of their ownership.
Which is huge. I mean, that could literally mean building a building or not building a building, right? Because it's like, for us, we need to be around 6% to 7% untrended return on cost. If we're at 3%, right, we wouldn't be able to build a building because we won't get financing.
Exactly.
But if we can bump it by 3% with Central, well, now that just opened up a huge opportunity. And so outside of the short-term intern stay that we talked about, what are the other things that you're kind of seeing that are bumping the income for these buildings that Central is managing?
Yeah. So the other basket of services that Central offers owners include things like the valet services for parking, or valet services for package delivery, or in-room delivery of food from an F&B program, food and beverage program that's operated either in your ground floor retail. A lot of the Class A buildings will have retail at ground floor. You want those things to be good restaurants or convenience stores, or things that like really facilitate more convenience or fun or value for your residents. Well, when you can connect that retail to the in-room experience, that creates an opportunity for more value for your resident or your guest, but also a profit margin on the delivery of those foods, right? And or beverages or events and catering and other things that you can activate within the footprint of your multifamily building. So that's the other basket. I'll call it enhanced services.
Enhanced, specifically kind of focused on hospitality, it sounds like. And with the food and beverage side, are you guys owning those food and beverages businesses as well that are on the ground floor of these multifamily assets? Or are you just kind of partnering with them figuring out the back end so it integrates with your guys' technology.
Yeah, yeah. So as the owner of the building, we won't own any of those businesses, but we will encourage the right tenants to be in our building. And then we will ask Central to manage that whole ecosystem of our residents, our guests, our retail tenants in order to maximize value for everybody. In some cases, we've had the ability to convince retail tenants that it's a better choice to take retail in our building versus some other place because we've got the foot traffic of all of the residents. And not only the residents, but guests who come to the city and stay in the building. These things matter when a retail tenant is trying to figure out where they should invest in tenant improvements and like a long-term lease.
Right. Because the retail tenant will be able to monetize all the residential tenants in the building.
Exactly. And so you just need a manager who understands that ecosystem and can monetize it for you as the owner. And we asked Central to do that for us. So that's something they're able to do.
And that's been successful. You haven't had
Yes.
to start a whole F&B business.
No. And that's a very difficult, it's a different business altogether, super difficult. And you don't, not only do we at ICONIQ not want to own those businesses, but we like that Central doesn't own those businesses either. Central needs to activate those businesses on behalf of owners, and they need to remain agnostic about who are those businesses, right? Because if one is successful, it stays. If one is not successful, Central will trade it out and bring in a different food and beverage operator, right? Or a different restaurant. There are some cases on a super local basis where inside the community itself, Central can facilitate special events that might have catered services, but that's far different than having like your own food and beverage operation.
Interesting. So it feels like we're kind of at the summit of what we've seen from short-term and mid-term stays as far as really getting more revenue to these multifamily assets and being able to really create these hospitality experience. But obviously you guys are bullish on the overall kind of thesis of what Central is doing and the kind of category of this short-term stay multifamily asset.
Yes.
So how do you see the growth curve over the next 5 or 10 years for both Central, but then also as an industry?
Yeah. So let's start with the industry. The industry of flexible rentals, or even if you wanted to call it furnished or short-term stays, that I've got some notes about the size of that category, but I think it can approach $90 billion over the next, call it 10 years. I'd have to check my notes to see that. But that's not the main point. The main point is that the drivers of that growth over time really have to do with travel trends, like consumption of travel as a experience and global travel overall, right? So as that increases, this category increases because people don't only want to stay in hotels anymore. That era passed pre-COVID, and during COVID, people realized I can stay in lots of different ways around the world. And currently the largest real estate business in the world is Airbnb, right? And it is defined by staying in different places around the world in different ways. Next up, business travel. As business travel continues to be an important part of how global business takes place, it's going to help to drive consumption for travel in general. And that will be an important part of how the industry grows. And then there could be another driver, but I'm not thinking of it right now. We may come back to that. We'll see. But those two factors, the consumer travel and the business travel, are driving expansion of the short-term rental space.
Yeah, you had added a note from a research institution, and it said that right now the short-term rental market is valued at $32.25 billion just in the U.S.
Yes.
So obviously Airbnb is worldwide, but just for US, it's 32.25. And then the compounded annual growth rate of 10.93% is their projection, would then get it to 90.96. You're almost right on.
Exactly.
By 2034. So over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of that growth specifically coming from people that just traveling more in general, or why do you see the growth? Are they not staying in hotels because hotels are antiquated and they're doing this instead?
Yes. Well, yeah, the two types of travel that I mentioned, right? Let's just call it like the consumer travel and then the business travel. Those are the two streams of demand. But once those streams meet, now there's the decision of what type of stay do I want? And let's use a couple examples. Today, post COVID pandemic, people are doing a lot more remote work. But that doesn't mean that groups and teams don't need to get together periodically for extended periods of time. Well, our research and the data suggests that if you're staying somewhere for more than, call it like 5 days, the footprint of a hotel gets a little tight, right? That third day of room service, no ability to wash laundry. You really couldn't stay there with your family if you needed to be there a couple weeks or a month, right? And so this the change in the way people get together, right? So they'll be out and about, but then they need to converge on a particular location for an extended period of time, means there need to be more choices in how to stay for that 5 to 90 day stay. And we think this has a lot to do with how the pie of total travel demand or accommodations demand is being sliced up. This category we're talking about, flexible furnished rentals, has also been called alternative accommodations, right? And if you look back at the old news on that, there was a great prediction that alternative accommodations were going to eat up a bunch of the hotel marketplace TAM. And that's turned out to be true. And Airbnb has grown as at the front end of that arrow, right? Of taking up some of that demand. So we don't see any indications right now in the data that says that is changing. At one point, it might have been double-digit growth, and now it's in the, depending on who you ask, maybe it might be single digits, but this is still like a major factor of change in how demand is.
So it's not necessarily that the pie is growing at an exponential rate of 10.93%, but rather this short-term stay is eating up really the traditional hotel hospitality market. And that is what's growing. And maybe the overall pie is growing. I haven't looked at research on that.
Yeah, the overall pie is also growing, but it's growing at a different rate than alternative accommodations are growing as a percentage of the total pie.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, transitioning to not central, because I forgot to ask this up front. But as we're wrapping up here, what is your favorite book?
My favorite book. My favorite book about the real estate business?
Yes.
Yes. So there's a book called Peak. It's by Chip Conley. And it's no accident that it's by Chip. Chip Conley is my mentor and was the reason I was recruited to Airbnb. And he wrote a book about how businesses engage the Maslow's rules of psychology, biology, and other to really become excellent providers of hospitality or whatever product category they might be in. It's really a business book that applies to all leadership, business leadership, but it's particularly useful in the real estate business because I think that a lot of times as real estate executives, we forget that we are in the people business. Sometimes we think we're in the construction business or the development business or the maintenance business, it can feel like from time to time. But the best businesses in real estate, I think, understand that they are in the people business. And that might be because you need the best people to operate your buildings. It could be because you need to create the best product that will bring your customer in and make them stay there, right? And so this book called Peak, I forget the subtitle for it, but it really helps set the mind to understand your customer. If you understand your customer, you can create the right product, and that will almost always deliver financial results that you want.
That's awesome. I'll have to read it. I'll put it in our 1,000 book library at Baker's and 3,000 book library at Edison. As we wrap up, what are you excited about for the future, both personally and professionally?
Ooh, that's a big one. Let's see. Professionally, that one's probably easier. Professionally, I really am excited to see this flexible living platform extend globally. What we're doing in the United States with Sentral has some precedents already in Europe and Asia with the service department model, but they have not branded it and created the global network that we think Central can be. So I'd love to see Central continue to grow in the United States and then expand overseas to offer this enhanced living experience to everybody around the world. That would be great to see. On the personal side, I'm still in love with real estate and especially its ability to help people have the best possible experience of themselves and others that they can have. And so that means you've got to create spaces that enable community. Community is built through connectivity, and connectivity happens when people are safe, comfortable, and inspired, right? So that's where I want to focus the next phase of my, real estate career is on how can I really dial in the factors that enable that type of real estate to exist on the planet. At one extent, one end of the spectrum, you've got spaces like temples and churches and places where people go to literally light up their spiritual fuse. That's really interesting real estate. And here, right on the ground, it's that doorway you walk in every day, where you lay your head every night, or where you meet your partner and you think about what happened that day and what you're going to do tomorrow, right? So all of those spaces need to be imbued with inspiration and positivity that comes through design and pragmatic approach to how things work, quality materials, safe and healthy materials, so people can live their best lives.
That's really cool. That's inspiring. Thanks for coming on the show. This was a great dialogue. Really appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
Yeah, for sure.
I actually wish I had learned to drum, and I haven't totally given up on it.
Oh, are you?
Seeing a good drummer in the zone?
It is. It looks so fun. It's like,
Gosh.
it's almost like therapeutic in a way.
And I do it in the car already, and I'm like this and this and this. Like, I know it's in my body. It's just I gotta get trained on how to get my feet and arms.
You did say you're not playing ball anymore, so
It's true.
you got some
There's
extra
some
time.
Yep. Empty nesting. There's about to be more time.